Joe Biden was at a fundraiser, I think it was last night, and he there's no footage of this, but he used the opportunity to warn people that we are closest to nuclear Armageddon than we have been at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I interpreted this as his wanting to essentially signal to Putin that we're taking this seriously. We want you to know that we're taking it seriously. We're not operating as if we think this is a bluff, but we're also not going to change our behavior. That's the way that I interpret that. Like he's going out there and he's not saying this to prepare the U.S. He's saying this to say to Putin, we get it. We get that you're serious, but you should know that we're not underestimating your seriousness, but we're still not going to stop pouring money into this war because you're losing. I mean, what's your sense of what's going on here?
I had exactly the same reaction as you when I heard it last night. Because first of all, look at the where he said it. He didn't go out and say this in some kind of public forum. It was said, I think, in front at a fundraiser or some kind of a sort of a private meeting of some sort, knowing that it was going to get out. I mean, that, obviously that it was planted to get out. So, which says to me, I mean, it's kind of a version in a way of the Cuban Missile Crisis Gambit that Kennedy did, right? I mean, because he sent a private, he sent, two different messages, one saying we'll pull the missiles out of Turkey and another one saying that they wouldn't, and publicly sort of, being very aggressive. The idea being that you're operating on several channels when you're in a situation like this, and that you're saying certain things to sort of give an impression. Same thing's happening with Taiwan and China, by the way, where this, what they call strategic ambiguity, by having, Pelosi go over there and then, it's no big deal on one hand. And then, so they're trying to sort of keep different channels, saying different things and hoping that this sort of gives at least the people in charge, in this case, Putin, the message that exactly what you just said. So, I think they seem to be handling this pretty deftly, as far as I can tell. I mean, obviously being no expert and we don't know a lot, we probably won't know for many years what was really happening in this whole situation. But, it's very difficult. I did read, and it's scary because, nuclear war actually is on the table. I mean, we're hearing people talking about it very seriously. This is not some, you can't just say, it's just a bunch of saber rattling, because there's an actual war going on, and there's some very serious ramifications. And there's a lot of political churning around this in the U.S., in Europe, and obviously in Russia, which is also maybe the most interesting thing about all this. The fact that Putin did this big, call up of draftees, and there's this huge protest going on within Russia. I mean, people are taking boats across the Bering Strait to get to Alaska now. That actually happened over the weekend. This is a big deal, and I think that's exactly what they were doing. I mean, I don't know how people like to attribute to Joe Biden that everything he says is a gaffe, and he does commit a tremendous number of gaffes. But in this case, I agree with you. I think this was probably very, very, planned as a way to sort of send this message in a covert, way.
My concern, though, is just that I know that, I'm glad we're leading with this, because I feel like the idea of nuclear Armageddon is such, we have a cognitive dissonance about it because we can't imagine that would happen. But I mean, since March or something, Russian forces have held control of Europe's largest nuclear facility. I can't pronounce it, but it's within Ukraine. And now Putin is making like a public declaration to publicly annex it, essentially, and say this is a part of Russia. We're nationalizing this. And so, I mean, that's gotta play into this, because he's trying to be as explicit as he can be. This is on the table, and Biden's now making it clear as well. We're not going to back down, but should we back down a little bit because of I just don't want Ukraine to become a proxy war where both sides are openly discussing nuclear Armageddon. And not saying that Biden's advocating for it, but the fact that's even in the discussion is concerning.
Oh, it's very concerning that it's in the discussion. Although I don't think that the U.S. is the one who that brought this up. I mean, I think it's been Putin hinting about this actually from the very beginning. It's interesting. I read an article by Timothy Snyder, the fellow who writes about democracy. I think he's a professor at, I don't know, one of the Princeton, Harvard, somewhere. And he's an expert on the 1930s and what happened in Germany, et cetera. And he addresses this issue in his article about the fact that, I mean, first of all, just when you start talking about nuclear war, this is, it's the ultimate nightmare, right? I mean, there's nothing more, especially, I mean, people my age, probably even more than you guys, who grew up with nuclear war being a very, very real possibility. I mean, I went through the drills in elementary school. That I was actually part of that, and we believe my father worked for a while in a nuclear test silo in Kansas. So this was just part of our lives, and I still have nightmares about it. I mean, it's just something that's part of it's part of your psyche when you grow up in that situation. So I get that, and there is a feeling, and Snyder talks about this in his piece, but also suggests that basically it is far more likely, and I found his viewpoint very comforting in a way. And he's very persuasive, I think. He's a very persuasive writer generally. And he talks about the fact that this is very unlikely to result in nuclear war. Now, nuclear accident, Emma, which you bring up with these nuclear power plants, is kind of a different thing. It's a different form of leverage than saying we might drop a bomb or use tactical nuclear weapons, which is what they've been talking about. And probably even worse, right? I mean, the idea of a nuclear meltdown of that gigantic nuclear power plant, that's could be way, way, way worse than Chernobyl. I mean, really, really bad, in Fukushima or any of the accidents that we've had. But he points out that Snyder points out that it's highly unlikely, and what is most likely, if you look at everything that's happened in the post-war world, the nuclear age, is that there's a power struggle going on within Russia. And that is where the real focus is, and that's where the real diplomacy is aimed, and that's where all the sort of public discussion is sort of looking at, that all the evidence out there suggests that is what is really happening. Now, whether or not, that means that, Vladimir Putin feels under threat, or whether, will make some kind of impulsive, irrational decision, is unknown, but in his view, it's unlikely. I suggest everybody read that. It's actually quite good. And I don't have an answer. I mean, obviously nobody does. We don't know what's going on here. Your question about whether or not we should withdraw, I just instinctively have a feeling, just looking at history and looking at these kind of situations, that it's probably a bad idea to do that. When you see the rise of the right throughout the globe, right happening right now and within our own country, I just instinctively feel that probably doing that in the face of threats is probably a bad idea. But that's just my opinion. I mean, what do I know?
This is the thing. If you start to walk through, and we should say, we just got an NIM to this effect that Zelensky, I don't know if anybody saw this, the video of Zelensky calling for NATO to do preemptive strikes. And the IMer makes the point that it's unlikely that he made that public call without getting a sign off from the U.S. or NATO or something to that effect, which I think is probably the case. But this would be part of trying to essentially signal to Putin that the U.S. and NATO and Ukraine is taking it seriously, that he is, his threat seriously, but our response is not a function of thinking he's bluffing. Our response is a response to thinking he's serious, in which case it's basically, everybody's testing each other's resolve here, what
Sure.
it seems like. And I in the event that we were to stop all of our funding unconditionally, it seems to me that what would happen is the war would grind on, but ultimately it's likely that Russia would win. But what is fascinating to me, and this is what I thought from get-go, there was a great piece in The Intercept where apparently the CIA completely got this wrong. I mean, there's a lot of things to be, this is a worthwhile piece to read because it shows the CIA doesn't seem to operate very well anymore. I mean, I don't know if at any time that we had intelligence capability, but like, if the CIA can't make this assessment, I just don't know what they can do.
I mean, historically, it's been bad on Russia, I think.
Yes, I mean, very bad, but also bad on Iraq and like and I don't know, honestly, if the CIA ever functioned as an intelligence agency. I'm not talking about the sort of like covert ops. I'm talking about just sheer intelligence. But apparently the CIA thought, and I think as everybody did, and it's probably why everybody did, that Russia was easily capable of coming in and within 3 or 4 days taking Kyiv and presumably killing or exiling Zelensky and taking over the country. And I think you could see at the beginning of the war, before the invasion, you had Joe Biden and the Biden administration run around like their pants on fire trying to convince people that it was true. Ukraine didn't think it was real. And apparently the CIA was like, it's going to take 3 or 4 days, which is why we didn't see the pouring of money in the way, like, there was money, certainly some money that was in weapons given to Ukraine in the months and the years leading up to this invasion. But it's a fraction of what has taken place over the past 10 months. I mean, like a tiny fraction. They weren't going to put money into Ukraine because they thought this is a losing battle. In fact, they pulled CIA operatives and special ops out of Ukraine because they thought these people are going to be, we're going to lose these ops because Russia's going to sort of just steamroll. And I think Putin also thought that was the case. And nobody realized like how decrepit this massive fighting machine had become and how inept the whole thing has become. And then of course the United States is like, oh, and NATO are like, Ukraine could win this. We're going to pour this money in.
And more operations within Ukraine than they had previously, according to The Intercept. So, like, the fact that they're telegraphing it somewhat defeats the purpose, but whatever.
Well, no, I mean, I think at this point, like, listen, I mean, I have a problem with us expending this amount of money on war. But the American public, the reality is, the American public does not care an iota. They didn't care that we were doing this when we were the ones who were invading. I mean, you remember this, Heather, like for 2 years almost, upon the launch of the invasion and occupation of Iraq, you can walk around and like, nobody seemed to even know that we were at war. And we had 100 some odd thousand, I mean, more, almost 200,000, maybe at 1.3, more than that, troops on the ground. And now it's just like every now and then there's a number, 760 million, 800 million, 400 million, almost like every week there's another number like that. And it's just, it is a complete abstraction to the American public. There's no way the U.S. government is not going to pursue this. And, I I have a problem with us engaging in war and doing so unconditionally. I would like there to be some pressure exerted to find a negotiated peace. But that also, is contingent upon this guy who decided to invade Ukraine and is now, like, his entire regime seems to be in the balance, based upon what he can justify this whole thing from. We saw this the last time with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They basically went down with the ship in Afghanistan. And there's no reason to believe that Putin's not going to do the same thing.
Well, I think that really, and it makes logical sense that underlying all of this, and I think, again, like what you said in the beginning, that they're signaling through this very sort of, opaque means various things publicly. They also have to deal with Europe, which is, our long-term alliance with NATO, and also just our moral alliance with Europe. And the, the idea that they're having to wrangle an awful lot of different interests in trying to deal with this thing. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And to me, what it seems obvious, and, again, take with a grain of salt my opinion on this, but they're counting on the regime, the Putin regime, falling apart. I think that is, and that's the most, it's very dangerous as well, because look, who replaces him? We don't know. Is there, some great peaceful, wonderful, modern, liberal democracy awaiting, or something, just as bad or worse? So I don't know. But to me, that seems like the logical, at least hope that it is, sort of pushing to just keep the pressure on as hard as they can. On the other hand, there are signs that they are trying to do diplomacy, under the radar diplomacy with various, players in Turkey and, otherwise, that they're kind of trying to work to do that. So, we don't really know what's going on in that regard. It is true that nobody seems to care about this issue. There are some people on the left and on the right who want to end the American involvement in Ukraine. And basically, many people who think that Ukraine should just go ahead and give it up, that it's a pointless exercise and they're going to lose eventually anyway, or at the very best case scenario is they lose half their country. And then, fight some kind of skirmish over the rest of it for, the foreseeable future. And that's the practical way to look at it, that they're just going to lose. But as you point out, the U.S. intelligence, and I think the European intelligence agencies, too. It wasn't just the U.S.
Right.
And by the way, it wasn't really an illogical thought. The Russians have had a massive military, a huge amount of military expenditures. You assumed over the years that they were, minimally competent. To see that this kind of disastrous military, kind of result is kind of shocking. Obviously, the intelligence agency should have known better. You'd think they would have known what was going on with the Russian military. But, remember, Sam, and you guys know history. This overestimation of Russian military capability goes all the way back to the Cold War.
Right.
This people were running for years. Republicans and right wingers ran for years on the idea that we were underestimating Russian military capability, and then it always turned out that they sucked, basically, at least by comparison. But of course, nuclear. That's the real. Who needs a capable military when you have a nuclear arsenal? And they have a monstrous nuclear arsenal. It's not just, but it's not one of these situations like North Korea, who may lob off a couple of, nuclear warheads, as horrifying as that may be. Russia has the capability of ending the world if they somehow went nuts and chose to do it. So that's the big threat that they have, which brings us back to the beginning of the conversation.
Right. And,
what the hell do we do when you've got Russia behaving what appears to me to be pretty incoherently? This move that they made, just on a purely, strategic level, just seems kind of insane, which is why you look at Vladimir Putin and go, what's happening with this guy? Why, I mean, we've heard all the theories. We don't need to go over it on why he did it, and the Russian Empire and Peter the Great and all the rest of the stuff. And so there's plenty of reasoning there that we can maybe attribute this to, but really, does it make a lot of sense? I mean, what did they underestimate?
Well,
their intelligence services doing?
I think Putin was under the same impression that the CIA was in the European, that he was going to take over Ukraine in 3 days, and at that point, like, why not? That you get Crimea, you get the Donbass, and you have a client state in Ukraine, and whether it is a function of, or some combination of, like, wanting a return to the Russian Empire, or some type of glory, or it is some type of buffer zone, I guess, with NATO. Whatever it was, he made a grave miscalculation. And I'm really curious, and I haven't checked in with what John Mearsheimer is saying. And I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of his sort of analysis necessarily. But, if you're going to have this great power theory, it works both ways, right? Like, of course, the United States is going to press their advantage here. It's one thing that they would have started a proxy war. They clearly did not start this war. It's another that they're going to engage in it, in the sense that, like, they can win. And it does appear like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't bet, I wouldn't even bet Saul's college fund at this point, and knowing I got, some years to make up on it, on Russia not basically having to leave the entire country and give up Crimea or the Donbass. I don't know. I mean, it's quite clear that it's not going the way that Russia thought it was going to go. I mean, that was clear 7 months ago, 8 months ago. So, but I mean, I don't think that Biden wants a nuclear war, and I also don't think, like, it's. I would like it to go away in the same way that I would like to have wings and fly, but there is not. Even putting aside the question of, like, saying to Ukraine, we're not going to fund you at all, because
no, you can make the funding now from here on out conditional on.
You could, but I don't know what the settlement would be that they would, actually negotiate. Like, I don't know what that would look like at this point in Ukraine, particularly when, if you're to believe the news reports, and I don't, you're starting to see, like, mass graves, you're starting to see torture and this and that. Like, I think that's a hard sell, that, like, we're going to trust you guys, do your best in those negotiations. Oh, okay. I mean, it's just one of those.
That has certainly upped the ante on this. The torture, the mass graves, this kind of the atrocities. When you start seeing that stuff, you're in a, especially, I mean, look, this is happening in Europe, right? I mean, this is, it's not that long ago in the great historical sweep of things that they had a very major issue with the, torture, atrocities, etc. In World War II. I mean, Europeans, that's a very fresh memory to them. It really is. I mean, these are people, and one of the things that's a big sign of just how seriously the Europeans are viewing this, I mean, setting aside Ukraine itself, but just the whole region there, is what's the fact that Sweden and Finland joined NATO.
Right.
And they had resisted this for 60, 70 years. I mean, this was not, I was shocked by it, to tell you the truth. And what it said to me was, oh boy, that they are really seriously concerned. They would not have done that. I mean, these aren't, those are sophisticated countries. They had resisted this through thick and thin, through the entire Cold War. And then suddenly, when this happened, they suddenly went, okay, enough. We need to be part of this alliance because this is a serious threat. And for me, and looking at Europe and the way Europe looks at this, when you see atrocities happening on the ground, that and I'm assuming that it's true. I mean, that it's been verified by news organizations and various people there. It's not just stuff that's coming out on the internet. I mean, this is for real. I don't think the Europeans can tolerate this. I don't think that they can just tolerate saying, okay, fine, take what you want. I mean, that their beliefs around this are very strong, and they count on United States. Well, I mean, it would spell the end of of America's alliances if they were to just sort of step back and say, hey, guys, you're on your own, which is how the Europeans would feel about that. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts and very, very complicated. And I think they're doing a lot of things in a bunch of different directions to try and control the situation to the best extent they can. And like you say, spending vast sums of money to do it with, we're arguing over stuff like, should we expand the child tax credit? Oh, no, we can't afford it.
Right.
At the same time, writing blank checks for a war. But hey, that's the way it's always been, isn't it? I mean, that's how we roll here.
Yep. All right, let's turn to U.S. politics. I mean, it is sort of fascinating how, we're just pouring this money in, and there is really no national debate whatsoever about it.
And we're at an election. I mean, imagine. I mean, that's just.
I mean, and I brought it up, and I immediately started choking. So they're trying to.
Yeah,
they're trying to silence me.
Big tech is trying to silence.
You're being canceled, Emma. No doubt
I know.
about it.
I'm
right.
a victim.